In the autumn of 1823, the small New England town of Briarwood settled into its usual rhythm beneath a canopy of amber and crimson leaves. Nestled among rolling hills and dense forests, the town was a close-knit community of fewer than 500 souls, bound together by shared history, devout faith, and the steady hum of daily labor. At the heart of Briarwood stood a centuries-old wooden church, its steeple piercing the grey sky like a steadfast sentinel. This church was more than a building. It was the spiritual anchor of the town, a place where generations had sought solace, guidance, and communion. The residents of Briarwood were a people shaped by their environment and history. Founded in the late 17th century by Puritan settlers, the town had weathered wars, epidemics, and the relentless march of time with a quiet resilience. Their Presbyterian faith was woven into every aspect of life. Sunday services were sacrosanct, and the church bells tolling was as familiar as the rising sun. It was a town where everyone knew each other's names, where doors were left unlocked, and where suspicion was a stranger. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe to never miss a new video. And tell me, where are you watching this video from? I love seeing all different people come together for these stories. Yet beneath this veneer of tranquility, an undercurrent of unease had begun to stir. The summer had been unusually dry, and the air carried a brittle chill that hinted at the coming winter. More unsettling still were the recent whispers among the townsfolk, rumors of strange happenings and unexplained fires that had set nerves on edge. Briarwood was a community steeped in faith and reason, yet even the most devout found themselves unsettled by shadows that seemed to grow longer each day. The church, the heart of Briarwood's spiritual and social life, had stood firm through generations, surviving storms and the slow decay of time. Its timbered walls bore the marks of countless hands, its pews polished by decades of worshippers. The stained glass windows filtered sunlight into kaleidoscopic patterns, casting a serene glow over the altar where ministers had preached hope and salvation. Every Sunday morning, the townspeople gathered within its walls, their voices lifted in hymns that echoed through the vaulted ceiling. But in the weeks leading up to October, an eerie silence had begun to replace the familiar chorus. The church bell, once a constant presence, had grown quiet. Faint smoke had been noticed by those passing the building at dusk, and small scorch marks appeared on the wooden siding, marks dismissed as the work of careless children or natural decay. Yet the unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of the town's collective consciousness. Briarwood's isolation contributed to its insularity. Situated miles from the nearest trading post, the town relied heavily on itself. News arrived slowly, carried by weary travelers or scribbled letters. In such a place, superstition could take root easily, especially when events defied explanation. The townspeople had long warned their children of spirits and omens, of divine judgment and the thin veil separating the mortal world from the supernatural. It was a world where prayer was a shield and faith a fortress. On the morning of October 6th, the town awoke to a sky shrouded in heavy clouds, the wind carrying a faint scent of smoke. As the congregation gathered in the church for the 10 o'clock service, a sense of normalcy pervaded the air, tempered by an unspoken tension. Children in their Sunday best sat with their families, elders exchanged greetings, and Reverend Whitmore prepared his sermon with a steady hand. But as the organ began to play the opening hymn, an acrid smell filled the sanctuary. Within moments, wisps of smoke appeared near the pulpit, growing thicker by the second. Panic erupted as flames licked the wooden beams, consuming the altar in a furious blaze. The congregation fled into the autumn air, hearts pounding and eyes wide with disbelief. The fire raged swiftly, devouring the church that had stood for over a century, leaving behind only charred remains and a stunned silence. In the days that followed, Briarwood struggled to comprehend the loss. The church had been more than a building. It was a symbol of the town's identity and faith. Its destruction felt like a wound inflicted upon the soul of the community. Yet the cause of the fire remained a mystery. There had been no storm, no lightning strike, no careless candle left unattended. The local blacksmith confirmed that no sparks had come from his forge, and the town's few fires were carefully tended. As the townsfolk sifted through the ashes, whispers began to spread. Some claimed the fire was a sign of divine wrath, punishment for sins long hidden beneath the town's pious surface. Others feared darker forces at work, curses, witches, or restless spirits angered by humanity's neglect. Theories multiplied in hushed conversations at the market, the tavern, and the schoolhouse. Despite the growing unease, life in Briarwood pressed on. Farmers tended their fields, children attended school, and families gathered for evening meals. Yet the shadow of the fire lingered, a spectre haunting the town's collective heart. The absence of the church left a void, both physical and spiritual, that no one knew how to fill. In this fragile atmosphere, the arrival of Reverend Samuel Alden was a beacon of hope. A man of stern demeanor but compassionate spirit, Alden came from a neighboring township, summoned by Briarwood's elders to guide the congregation through this crisis. His reputation as a thoughtful minister and steady hand preceded him, and many saw in him the promise of healing. From the moment Reverend Alden stepped onto Briarwood's soil, he sensed the deep wounds left by the fire. He moved among the people with quiet purpose, listening to their fears and doubts, offering prayers and counsel. His sermons spoke of resilience, forgiveness, and the power of faith to overcome darkness. Yet beneath his calm exterior, Alden was determined to uncover the truth behind the fires that had shattered the town's peace. The church's ruins stood at the center of town like a scar. Each day, townsfolk gathered around the smoldering timbers, their faces etched with sorrow and confusion. Children dared each other to approach, while elders whispered of signs and omens. Reverend Alden, alongside blacksmith Jonas Crane and Abigail Wells, the local schoolteacher, began to examine the site with a careful eye. They sought evidence, answers, anything that might explain the inexplicable. What they found was perplexing. Amid the blackened beams and ash, strange scorch marks appeared, patterns that seemed deliberate, almost ritualistic. These marks defied the randomness of fire. They resembled symbols etched deep into the wood, untouched by the surrounding flames. The trio pored over these sigils, their meanings elusive but undeniably intentional, suggesting human hands had played a role in the church's destruction. The discovery deepened the mystery and sent ripples through the community. If the fires were not accidents or natural disasters, then who was responsible? What motive could drive such an act against the sacred heart of Briarwood? Suspicion began to spread like wildfire itself, fracturing the town's unity. Trusted neighbors eyed one another warily, and old grievances resurfaced beneath the weight of fear. Amid this growing paranoia, Reverend Alden's efforts to maintain peace and faith became increasingly challenging. His sermons called for patience and understanding, urging the people not to succumb to fear or division. Yet beneath his composed words, he grappled with the same questions haunting the town. Who or what had set the church ablaze, and why? As autumn deepened and the first frost kissed the fields, Briarwood found itself at a crossroads. The loss of their church was a wound still fresh, and the fire's mysterious nature cast a shadow over every gathering, every whispered prayer. The town's spiritual heart had been scorched, and with it, the fragile bonds holding the community together. In the quiet moments before dawn, Reverend Alden would often stand among the ruins, contemplating the strange marks and the weight of his responsibility. The answers he sought lay somewhere beyond the ashes, woven into the fabric of Briarwood's history and the hearts of its people. The path forward was uncertain, but he knew that the coming days would test the town's faith and his own, in ways none could yet imagine. On the crisp morning of Sunday, October 13th, 1823, Briarwood stirred with an uneasy anticipation. The scarred remains of the old church still smouldered from the fire that had consumed it the week prior, yet the townsfolk, bound by tradition and faith, gathered once more at the appointed hour. The absence of their sacred meeting place was a palpable void, but the congregation resolved to maintain their ritual, assembling in the open air beneath the skeletal branches of ancient oaks that ringed the town square. The sky was a muted grey, the chill of autumn creeping into the bones of the gathered crowd. Men in threadbare coats stood beside women clutching shawls, their breath misting in the cold air. Children huddled close, their wide eyes reflecting both curiosity and unease. Whispers passed from lip to lip, questions, fears, speculation, but none dared to openly speak of the growing dread that gripped Briarwood's heart. Reverend Alden stepped onto a makeshift platform, constructed hastily by Jonas Crane, the blacksmith, and offered a solemn prayer. His voice, steady yet tinged with sorrow, sought to steady the congregation. He spoke of perseverance, of faith tested by fire, and the divine purpose that might yet reveal itself in these dark days. The gathering responded with measured hymns, their voices tentative but resolute, weaving a fragile tapestry of hope. Yet as the service reached its midpoint, a sudden, acrid tang filled the air, sharper and more insistent than the smoke that lingered from the previous week's blaze. Eyes turned toward the town square's center, where a flicker of flame appeared near the base of a wooden cross erected in memory of the lost church. Within moments, the small flame blossomed into a fierce blaze, consuming the cross and leaping toward the dry grass beneath the feet of the congregation. Panic erupted. Shouts rang out as people scrambled to safety, clutching children and seeking refuge from the rapidly spreading fire. The wind, shifting unpredictably, fanned the flames, which surged with a terrifying speed. Attempts to quench the fire with buckets of water and blankets proved futile. The blaze seemed to devour everything in its path with unnatural hunger. Amid the chaos, Reverend Alden moved with deliberate calm, guiding the frightened townspeople away from danger and calling for order. His voice rose above the crackling inferno, urging them to safety and reminding them of the strength found in unity. Yet even as he shepherded his flock, the church's destruction was echoed in this new, inexplicable fire. A searing wound reopened. As the flames consumed the makeshift cross and encroached upon the gathered crowd's edge, Jonas Crane and a few able-bodied men formed a bucket line, their hands raw and trembling with urgency. Sweat mixed with soot streaked their faces as they labored against the merciless blaze. Despite their efforts, the fire's ferocity seemed to defy natural explanation, spreading with a purpose that chilled the soul. When at last the flames were subdued, smoldering patches remained as grim reminders of the morning's terror. The congregation, shaken but unbroken, regrouped on the outskirts of the square, eyes wide with disbelief and hearts heavy with fear. The church had burned once before, but now it seemed that the very ground upon which they stood was cursed, marked by a wrath that no earthly force could quell. In the days that followed, Briarwood was gripped by a creeping dread. The fires, inexplicable in origin and terrifying in their recurrence, became a grim fixture of the town's Sundays. Each week, as the congregation gathered, whether in the open fields, private homes, or the few remaining public spaces, the fire would return, igniting anew with no discernible cause. The pattern was relentless, a cruel rhythm that shattered any hope of normalcy. The townspeople grew restless and divided. Some whispered of divine punishment, a reckoning for sins buried deep within the community's past. Others feared darker forces at work, witchcraft, curses, or the wrath of spirits long wronged. The fires were no longer just an event. They had become a symbol of something greater, an omen that unsettled the very foundation of Briarwood's existence. Rumors swirled with increasing fervor. Some claimed to have seen shadowy figures near the fires, cloaked and silent, their faces obscured beneath hoods. Others spoke of strange lights in the forest at night, of eerie chants carried on the wind. Mothers kept their children close, and even the most skeptical found themselves glancing nervously over their shoulders. Reverend Alden, burdened by his role as spiritual leader, sought to quell the rising panic. He preached sermons of steadfast faith and divine mercy, urging the townsfolk to resist despair. Yet his own heart was heavy with doubt. The fires defied all natural explanation, and the absence of any logical cause gnawed at his resolve. In private moments, Alden conferred with Abigail Wells, the town's schoolteacher, whose keen mind and gentle spirit provided a rare source of comfort. Together, they pored over accounts from those who had witnessed the fires, seeking patterns or clues that might illuminate the mystery. Abigail's observations were meticulous. She noted the fire's timing, the locations where they flared, and the curious absence of any accelerants or sparks. Despite their efforts, no natural cause emerged. The fires appeared at random spots within the town's center, always during or immediately following the Sunday service. Investigations by Jonas Crane and other townsmen found no evidence of tools or devices that could have ignited the flames. The scorched earth bore no signs of lightning strikes or electrical disturbances. The phenomenon was as baffling as it was terrifying. As the weeks wore on, the pattern grew more ominous. The fires seemed to carry a will of their own, appearing with increasing frequency and intensity. They spared nothing: the market stalls, the town hall's wooden facade, even the schoolhouse doors bore the marks of their wrath. Briarwood was caught in a relentless cycle of destruction and fear. The communal spirit that had once defined the town began to fray. Neighbors looked upon each other with suspicion, and whispered accusations took root. Some blamed traveling strangers who had passed through recently. Others pointed fingers at those deemed outsiders or troublemakers. Old grievances resurfaced, and the fragile bonds holding the community together threatened to unravel. Amid this turmoil, Reverend Alden found himself at the center of a growing storm. His calls for patience and unity met resistance from those who demanded swift action and retribution. Town meetings grew heated, with voices raised in anger and despair. The minister's authority was challenged, even as he struggled to maintain his own faith. On one particularly tense evening, Alden convened an emergency gathering in the town hall, its walls heavy with the weight of fear. The room was filled with anxious faces, lit by flickering candlelight that seemed all too fragile against the darkness threatening to engulf Briarwood. "We stand at a crossroads," Alden addressed the crowd, his voice firm yet compassionate. "These fires test our resolve, but they do not define us. We must not succumb to fear or division. Together, in faith and reason, we will seek the truth and rebuild what has been lost. His words, though met with nods, rang hollow to many. The wounds were deep, and the path forward uncertain. As the meeting adjourned, townsfolk dispersed into the night, their minds heavy with questions that lingered unanswered. Outside, the wind carried a faint, smoky scent, a reminder that the fires were never far behind. The pattern was clear, yet the cause remained shrouded in darkness. Briarwood's Sundays had become days of dread, their sacred gatherings shadowed by flames that no one could explain. The town's future hung precariously in the balance as the fires continued their relentless dance, an enigma that would challenge the faith, unity, and very survival of Briarwood in the days to come. In the weeks following the second Sunday blaze, Briarwood found itself gripped by a chilling pattern that defied all explanation. The fires, each ignited without cause, each arriving with eerie precision during the hour of worship, had become a grim fixture in the town's calendar. No storm, no stray ember, no faulty candle could be blamed. Yet every Sunday, as the congregation gathered, a new conflagration would arise, consuming whatever fragile structures or offerings remained. This relentless cycle unsettled the townsfolk profoundly. The wooden church, once the community's spiritual heart, was gone. Now even the modest spaces where services were held were threatened by flames inexplicably born from nowhere. The market stalls were scarred, the schoolhouse's doors bore singed marks, the town hall's facade was blackened in places. The fires left behind strange scorch marks, sigils etched into wood and stone, symbols no one recognized, but which seemed purposeful, deliberate, and unsettling. Rumors began to swirl, growing like wildfire itself. Whispers of curses and divine retribution took root in conversations hushed by fear. Some claimed the fires were punishments for the town's hidden sins, old grievances, whispered scandals, and secrets buried beneath years of piety. Others spoke of malevolent forces at work, witches, restless spirits, or a secret sect seeking to cleanse or control Briarwood through fire. The community, once tightly knit, began to fracture under the weight of suspicion and dread. Neighbors eyed one another with distrust. Old friends exchanged wary glances. The marketplace, once a place of cheerful barter and gossip, grew silent and tense. Mothers kept their children close, and even the churchyard, a place of solace, was avoided after dusk. Into this maelstrom stepped Reverend Samuel Alden, a man whose stern yet compassionate demeanor had become a beacon for many. Though burdened by doubt and the weight of his calling, Alden was resolute in his mission to restore faith and unity. He traveled from home to home, offering counsel, prayers, and a steady hand to those whose spirits wavered. His sermons, delivered in whatever space could be found, spoke of endurance, forgiveness, and the mysterious ways of providence. Yet even Alden could not ignore the growing fear that threatened to consume Briarwood. The fires were more than mere accidents. They seemed purposeful, as if the town itself was being judged or punished. Some parishioners whispered openly that the church's destruction was divine wrath made manifest, a scourge sent to purge the town of its hidden sins. Others, more pragmatic or fearful, began to entertain darker suspicions. Tales circulated of shadowy figures seen near the fire's origins, cloaked individuals moving silently through the night, their faces hidden beneath hoods. Strange lights were reported in the surrounding woods, and eerie chants carried on the wind unsettled even the most skeptical. The boundary between superstition and reality blurred, feeding the growing paranoia. Amid these swirling fears, Reverend Alden found unlikely allies in Jonas Crane, the town's blacksmith, and Abigail Wells, the schoolteacher. Jonas, a burly man known for his steady hands and clear eyes, had taken it upon himself to examine the ruins and scorch marks left in the fire's wake. Abigail, with her sharp mind and gentle spirit, meticulously recorded every detail, seeking patterns invisible to others. Together, the trio scrutinized the strange sigils etched into burned wood and stone. These marks, protected from the flames by some unknown means, suggested ritualistic intent. The symbols bore no resemblance to any known language or script. They were alien, yet deliberate, an eerie cipher hinting at human involvement, or perhaps something beyond human understanding. Their investigations deepened the mystery. No natural cause, no lightning strike, no faulty candle, no stray ember could be found. The fire's timing and locations were too precise, too orchestrated, and yet no signs of accelerants or tools to kindle the flames emerged. The phenomenon was baffling, even to the most rational minds. As suspicion grew, so did tensions within Briarwood. The once unified community splintered into factions. Some demanded justice and swift punishment for supposed arsonists or witches. Others urged caution, fearing that rash accusations would only deepen the town's wounds. The market square, once a place of fellowship, became a stage for whispered accusations and open hostility. Town meetings, called to address the crisis, often devolved into heated arguments. Reverend Alden's pleas for patience and faith were met with skepticism or outright defiance. The strain wore heavily on him. The spiritual leader found himself caught between his duty to comfort and the harsh realities fracturing his flock. Meanwhile, Abigail's careful records revealed a disturbing pattern. The fires always ignited during or immediately after the Sunday service, often near symbols or relics tied to the church's past. The scorched sigils were consistently found at the fire's origin points, suggesting they were more than mere coincidence. This pointed toward a deliberate, ritualistic cause rather than random misfortune. Jonas, driven by a sense of duty and frustration, began to patrol the town at night. His watchful eyes sought any sign of the shadowy figures rumored to be behind the blazes. Though his efforts yielded no direct encounters, strange noises in the woods and fleeting glimpses of movement kept his unease growing. Amid the escalating fear, Briarwood's social fabric frayed further. Families once united by faith and friendship now faced each other across invisible divides. Suspicion bred resentment. Resentment bred isolation. The church's absence was not only physical but spiritual, a wound that no prayer seemed able to heal. On a bleak October evening, Reverend Alden convened a solemn gathering in the town hall, the only space large enough to hold the growing crowd, seeking answers and solace. The room was heavy with the scent of candle wax and damp wood, the flickering light casting long shadows on anxious faces. Alden spoke with measured gravity. "We stand at the threshold of trial," he declared. "These fires test not only our homes, but our hearts. We must resist fear, seek understanding, and remember that faith endures beyond flame and ruin." His words were met with murmurs, some hopeful, others doubtful. The need for answers was urgent, but none seemed forthcoming. The fires, relentless and inscrutable, pressed upon the town like a dark tide. As the meeting ended and the crowd dispersed into the cold night, a heavy silence settled over Briarwood. The fire's pattern persisted, their mystery deepening, and with it the creeping dread that the town might be caught in forces beyond human reckoning. The weeks ahead promised no reprieve. The burning church was but the beginning, and the sigils scorched into Briarwood's heart whispered of secrets yet to be unveiled. The town's fragile unity, tested by fear and suspicion, would soon confront truths that threatened to consume it whole. The arrival of Reverend Samuel Alden in Briarwood was met with a mixture of relief and wary anticipation. News of the relentless fires and the town's growing unrest had spread to neighboring communities, and the elders of Briarwood, desperate for guidance and stability, petitioned for aid. When Alden stepped onto the worn dirt road leading into the town, his tall frame and austere black coat cut a solemn figure against the backdrop of autumnal trees. His eyes, sharp and contemplative, seemed to carry the weight of both conviction and compassion. Alden came from a nearby township, known for his steady leadership and unwavering faith in the face of hardship. His reputation as a man of both intellect and spirit preceded him, and the townspeople hoped he might offer clarity where confusion reigned. Yet beneath his composed exterior, Alden bore the burden of a long journey, both physical and spiritual, toward a place engulfed in fear and uncertainty. From the moment of his arrival, Alden set about understanding the depth of Briarwood's plight. The town, once vibrant and united, now wore the marks of suspicion and sorrow. Streets that had echoed with children's laughter were hushed, markets that bustled with trade were subdued, and the absence of the wooden church left a void not easily filled. The congregation, displaced and disoriented, gathered in small groups beneath the skeletal oaks. Their prayers whispered more out of habit than conviction. Alden's first days were spent listening. He met with the town's elders, farmers, blacksmith Jonas Crane, and schoolteacher Abigail Wells, whose meticulous observations had begun to piece together the strange pattern of the fires. With quiet determination, Alden walked through the charred remains of the church, his gaze lingering on the blackened beams and the curious scorch marks, the mysterious sigils that refused to be explained away. In the modest town hall, Alden convened the first of many meetings aimed at restoring order and hope. His voice, calm yet resonant, carried through the crowded room as he addressed the anxious faces before him. "My friends," he began, "we stand at a crossroads in our shared journey. The fires that have ravaged our sacred spaces test not only our faith, but our very community. Yet it is in trials that the strength of our spirit is revealed. We must seek truth with steady hearts and open minds, resisting the temptations of fear and blame." The room was silent, save for the crackling of the hearth fire and the occasional cough. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged uncertain glances. The weight of uncertainty pressed heavily upon all present. Over the ensuing days, Alden's presence became a pillar of constancy amidst the chaos. He visited homes to offer prayers and counsel, attended to the grieving, and tirelessly encouraged the townsfolk to hold fast to their faith. Yet beneath his pastoral care, Alden was a man of reason and inquiry. He was determined to uncover the root cause of the fires, to pierce the veil of mystery that enveloped Briarwood. His closest confidants in this endeavor were Jonas Crane and Abigail Wells. Jonas, a man of practical skills and steady hands, approached the fire's aftermath with methodical scrutiny. He examined the ruins, searching for any physical evidence, accelerants, tools, signs of human interference, that might explain the blazes. Abigail, with a scholar's mind and keen attention to detail, documented the patterns, times, and locations of the fires, correlating them with the town's activities and histories. Together, they began to form a picture that was at once perplexing and troubling. The fires were not random. They followed a pattern tied to the rhythm of the town's spiritual life. always during or immediately after the Sunday services. The strange scorch marks, etched with unnatural precision, hinted at ritualistic intent. These were not mere accidents or acts of malice, but seemed to carry a symbolic weight, as if the fires themselves were messages written in flame. As word of Alden's investigations spread, the townsfolk's reactions were mixed. Some found solace in his steady leadership, rallying around his calls for unity and faith. Others grew restless, their fear fermenting into suspicion and blame. The market square became a place of whispered accusations, where neighbors eyed one another with distrust, and old grievances resurfaced beneath the shadow of the fires. Alden was not blind to these tensions. He understood that the fires had done more than destroy timber and stone. They had fractured the very bonds that held Briarwood together. With a heavy heart, he sought to bridge these divides, calling for forgiveness and understanding, even as he pressed forward in his quest for answers. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the wooded hills, Alden and Abigail sat by the hearth in the modest parsonage, poring over her detailed notes and sketches of the scorch marks. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows across the pages, illuminating the strange symbols that defied interpretation. "These marks," Abigail murmured, tracing a jagged line beneath a series of arcs and dots. "They're not language as we know it. They seem ritualistic, perhaps a form of warning or invocation. But to what end?" Alden nodded thoughtfully. "If these are messages, they speak of a force beyond our understanding. We must be cautious but not fearful. The truth, whatever it is, must be faced with courage." Their discussions were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. Jonas entered, his brow furrowed, carrying a small wooden shard, charred but bearing a clear symbol. "I found this near the last fire's origin," he said, placing it on the table. "It matches the others. Whoever did this left their mark deliberately." The three exchanged heavy looks. The fires were not accidents. They were acts meant to send a message, to unsettle, and possibly to punish. As days turned to weeks, Alden's presence infused Briarwood with a fragile hope. He organized gatherings for prayer and reflection, encouraging the community to rebuild both their homes and their spirits. Yet the fires persisted, their pattern unbroken, their cause still hidden. Despite his resolve, Alden could not shake a creeping unease. The deliberate nature of the fires, the cryptic symbols, and the escalating fear among the townsfolk suggested forces at work that transcended mere human malice. The town was caught in a web of mystery and menace, and the path to salvation was shrouded in darkness. Still, Alden remained steadfast. He believed that through faith, reason, and unwavering community, Briarwood could endure. With Jonas and Abigail by his side, he prepared to delve deeper into the town's history, its secrets, and the shadows that had awakened with the first flames. The coming days would test not only their courage, but the very soul of Briarwood. Yet in the face of uncertainty and fear, Reverend Alden vowed to stand as a beacon, a shepherd guiding his flock through the fire, toward a dawn yet unseen. As the fires continued their merciless pattern, Reverend Alden, Jonas Crane, and Abigail Wells found themselves drawn deeper into the mystery that had engulfed Briarwood. Each Sunday's conflagration left behind more than charred ruins. It etched into the town an aura of dread and suspicion that clung to every corner. Determined to pierce the veil of uncertainty, the trio resolved to investigate the remains after the latest blaze with greater care and resolve. The morning after the fifth Sunday fire, Alden rose before dawn. The chill in the air was sharp, the sky brushed with the pale light of a hesitant sun. He met Jonas and Abigail near the smouldering ruins of the town hall, where the latest fire had begun. The building's blackened timbers cracked softly underfoot, and the acrid scent of smoke hung heavy. Despite the devastation, the place bore signs that the fire had been carefully managed, some areas untouched by flame, others consumed with precise intensity. Jonas knelt by the base of a charred post, examining the wood with a practiced eye. "These scorch marks," he said quietly, pointing to a series of sigils etched deeply into the timber. "They're not random. Look here. These symbols were carved before the fire. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Abigail crouched nearby, her notebook open as she sketched the sigils with meticulous care. "They resemble some kind of ritual markings," she mused, "but I've never seen anything like them in any of the texts or records I've studied. They seem old, older than Briarwood itself." Alden paced slowly among the ruins, his gaze fixed on the symbols. His mind replayed the accounts from villagers who claimed to have glimpsed cloaked figures moving silently before the fires ignited. The notion of human hands behind the destruction was troubling enough, but the ritualistic nature hinted at something more sinister. "We must consider the possibility that these fires are acts of deliberate malice," Alden said, his voice steady but grave. "Not merely vandalism, but messages, warnings perhaps, or curses designed to unnerve us." Jonas nodded. "If that's true, then we're dealing with a group who knows the town, and knows how to strike fear into its heart." Their investigation led them to the outskirts of the ruins, where the scorched earth gave way to the dense woods that embraced Briarwood. Here, the villagers seldom ventured after dark, whispering of strange lights and eerie sounds. Alden, Jonas, and Abigail moved cautiously, guided by the faint impressions of footprints and the occasional glimmer of disturbed foliage. In a small clearing, they discovered remnants of a fire pit, cold now but blackened with ash, and the scent of burned herbs. Surrounding the pit were stones arranged in a deliberate circle, inscribed with symbols that matched the scorch marks found at the fire sites. The scene was unmistakably ritualistic. Abigail's voice was hushed as she examined the stones. "This is no ordinary fire pit. These herbs, they're used in purification rites, but also in curses, depending on the intent." Alden felt a chill creep along his spine. "We are facing a secret that has taken root in our very soil. A sect, perhaps, seeking to punish or cleanse Briarwood through fire and fear." Returning to town, the trio shared their findings with a small circle of trusted townsfolk, hoping to rally support against the unseen threat. Their revelations only deepened the fissures within the community. Some met the news with determination, ready to confront the menace head-on. Others recoiled, fearful that uncovering the truth would invite further wrath. Rumors soon spread of clandestine meetings held beneath the cover of darkness, of strange symbols carved into doors and trees, and of whispers carried on the wind. Suspicion hardened into accusation. Neighbors eyed one another with growing distrust. In the weeks that followed, Briarwood's once unified spirit began to fracture. Families withdrew into their homes, and gatherings grew sparse. The market, once a hub of camaraderie, became a quiet place, shadowed by fear. Reverend Alden labored to hold the community together, preaching forgiveness and patience, but the seeds of paranoia had taken root. One evening, Alden was approached by a woman named Miriam, a widow whose husband had been among the first to suspect foul play. She spoke in a trembling voice of a secret meeting she had witnessed deep in the Amity woods, a gathering of cloaked figures chanting in a language she could not understand, their faces hidden beneath hoods. They spoke of fire as cleansing, Miriam said, her eyes wide with terror. They said Briarwood must be purified, that the old ways must be restored. Alden listened intently, the weight of her words settling heavily upon him. "We must learn more," he said quietly. "If such a sect exists, we cannot allow fear to rule us, but we must be vigilant." With this knowledge, Alden, Jonas, and Abigail planned a covert investigation. Under the cloak of darkness, they followed the faint trails through the forest, seeking the source of the fires and the secret sect that wielded them. Their nights were filled with tension and silent observation. They heard the distant murmur of voices, saw flickering lights among the trees, and glimpsed figures cloaked in black, moving with purpose and secrecy. The rituals they witnessed bore the same symbols as those scorched into the church's remains, the town hall, and other fire sites. Alden's heart ached at the sight. The sect's fanaticism threatened to consume Briarwood, their fires a weapon of fear and control. Yet the minister was determined to confront this darkness, not with violence, but with faith and reason. Back in town, the fires continued to burn with unrelenting regularity, each Sunday's destruction a grim reminder of the sect's presence. The townsfolk's fear deepened, their whispers growing louder, their suspicions dividing friend from friend. The secret sect, however, remained elusive. Their motives were unclear. Were they punishing the town for sins unknown, or attempting to wield power through terror? The ritualistic symbols suggested ancient beliefs, perhaps remnants of forgotten lore, clashing with Briarwood's Christian faith. As the trio delved deeper, they uncovered hints of historical grievances, land disputes, old family feuds, and accusations of heresy dating back generations. The sect's roots seemed intertwined with the town's own turbulent past, a shadowy reflection of its fears and divisions. Reverend Alden understood that the fires were more than mere acts of arson. They were a manifestation of Briarwood's fractured soul. Healing the town would require not only finding those responsible, but also mending the rifts of suspicion and fear that their actions had wrought. With renewed resolve, Alden prepared to confront the sect, to uncover their leader, and to bring light to the darkness threatening to consume Briarwood. Yet he knew the path ahead would be fraught with peril, and that the fire's true meaning, and the sect's ultimate aim, remained shrouded in shadow. Tensions within Briarwood had reached a breaking point. The relentless Sunday fires, each more inexplicable and destructive than the last, had fractured the town's once unified spirit into shards of suspicion and fear. The community that had once gathered in shared faith now found itself divided, whispers of blame and accusation echoing through the streets like a poison. Neighbors who had exchanged friendly greetings in the marketplace now avoided each other's eyes, their conversations clipped and wary. Families retreated behind locked doors, and the warmth of communal gatherings was replaced by cold silences. The market square, once alive with barter and camaraderie, had grown subdued and tense, its benches empty at dusk. Rumors swirled with increasing fervor. Some townsfolk pointed fingers at outsiders, travelers who had passed through Briarwood in recent months. Strange faces glimpsed at the edges of town. Others suspected those who dwelled on the fringes of society, the reclusive, the misunderstood, and the quietly dissenting. Old grievances, long buried beneath years of neighborly goodwill, resurfaced like embers stoked by the flames. In the town hall, where Reverend Alden had long held meetings to restore order and faith, the atmosphere had shifted. What had once been gatherings of hope had become arenas of heated argument and suspicion. Voices rose in anger and fear, and the minister's calls for patience and unity were met with skepticism or outright hostility. At a particularly charged meeting, Alden stood before the gathered citizens, his expression grave but resolute. "My friends," he began, "we face a trial unlike any before. The fires that ravage our homes and hearts are not merely accidents. They are wounds inflicted by forces we must understand, not fear. We must not allow suspicion to tear us apart." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, others scowled. A man from the back, known for his fiery temper and recent conflicts with neighbors, shouted, "Enough talk. We must find the ones who burn our town and bring them to justice. No more prayers. Action." The room erupted in voices, accusations, denials, and cries for retribution. Alden raised his hand, striving to restore order. "Justice without wisdom is blind and cruel. We must seek truth carefully, lest we condemn the innocent and deepen our wounds." Despite his efforts, the meeting ended with little resolution, the townsfolk dispersing in frustration and fear. The fractures within Briarwood's community had deepened, and with each passing day, the fire's shadows grew longer. Amid this turmoil, Reverend Alden found himself walking a lonely path. The burden of leadership weighed heavily upon him, as he sought to balance compassion with the harsh realities confronting his flock. His faith was tested, not only by the fires, but by the human frailties they had exposed. He confided in Abigail Wells, whose calm intellect and steadfast spirit provided a rare source of comfort. Together, they discussed the growing divisions and the dangers of unchecked fear. "Fear blinds reason," Abigail said softly during one evening's meeting at the parsonage. "If we do not bridge these divides, Briarwood will crumble from within, long before the fires consume it." Alden nodded, his eyes troubled. "We must find a way to heal the wounds, to restore trust. But how, when suspicion breeds more suspicion?" Jonas Crane, ever practical and grounded, joined them with a furrowed brow. "We need evidence, not rumors. If we can find the ones responsible, we can stop the fires and the blame." Their plan was simple, yet fraught with risk: to investigate discreetly, to seek out the truth behind the fires and the secret sect believed to be behind them. But as they delved deeper, they found their task complicated by the very fabric of the town's fears. Reports of shadowy figures and secret gatherings grew more frequent, but concrete proof remained elusive. The sect, if it existed, operated with a cunning that kept it hidden in plain sight. The townsfolk's accusations became increasingly wild. Claims of curses, witchcraft, and dark pacts filled the air. One evening, a confrontation erupted in the marketplace. A group of men accused a reclusive family, long mistrusted for their eccentric ways, of arson and dark dealings. Words turned to shouts, shouts to threats, and only the timely arrival of Alden and Jonas prevented violence. Alden's voice rang out, steady and commanding. "Enough! We cannot let fear turn us against one another. Remember our shared faith and the bonds that hold us together." The crowd reluctantly dispersed, but the damage was done. Suspicion had ignited a different kind of fire, one that threatened to consume the town's very soul. As the weeks passed, Briarwood became a town divided between those who sought calm and reason and those driven by fear and vengeance. The fractures cut deep, isolating families and friends, and leaving Alden to bear the heavy burden of leadership in a community on the brink. In the quiet moments before dawn, Alden often stood among the ruins of the old church, contemplating the strange scorch marks and the weight of his responsibility. He knew that the path to unity would be arduous, that the fire's mystery was but one facet of a deeper wound. Yet, Amid the fear and division, a spark of hope remained. Alden's conviction that faith, reason, and compassion could heal Briarwood's wounds sustained him. He resolved to continue his search for truth, to confront the darkness not only of the fires, but of the human hearts they had ignited. The days ahead promised challenges beyond the flames, a test of the town's spirit and the resilience of its people. Reverend Alden stood ready to face them, a shepherd striving to guide his flock through the gathering storm of fear, suspicion, and division toward a fragile dawn of understanding. Under the cloak of night, Reverend Alden and Abigail Wells moved silently through the dense woods that skirted Briarwood, their footsteps muffled by fallen leaves and the heavy shroud of darkness. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and the distant whisper of wind through the trees. Months of unrest had led them to this moment, an urgent need to unravel the mystery that had gripped their town in fear and suspicion. They had followed fragments of rumor and faint traces left behind by the secret sect suspected of orchestrating the fires. Tonight, their pursuit brought them to a secluded grove, a place whispered about in frightened tones among the townsfolk, but seldom visited. The moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting silver pools upon the forest floor, revealing a small clearing ringed with ancient oaks. From their concealed vantage point behind a thicket, Alden and Abigail watched as figures cloaked in black gathered beneath the towering trees. Their movements were deliberate and solemn, forming a circle around a central fire pit, where flames flickered with unnatural hues, blue and green tongues licking the night air, casting eerie shadows upon the faces hidden beneath dark hoods. The congregation began a low, rhythmic chant, their voices rising and falling in a cadence both hypnotic and unsettling. Strange symbols, identical to those scorched into the ruins of Briarwood's church and town hall, were drawn in the dirt before them, etched with ashes and what appeared to be charcoal. The air felt charged, heavy with an unspoken power. Abigail's breath caught as she whispered, "This is no ordinary gathering. These rites, they speak of purification, but also judgment. The fire is both a tool and a symbol." Alden nodded silently, his heart pounding beneath his clerical robes. The sect's intentions became chillingly clear. They sought not merely to punish, but to cleanse Briarwood, to impose a vision of purity through fire and fear. As the ritual unfolded, Alden recognized the weight of the moment. This was the sect's core, a fanatical group driven by a belief that their actions were divinely ordained. Their fires were acts of sacrifice, judgment, and control, designed to purge what they saw as corruption within the town. A sudden movement caught Alden's eye, a figure stepping forward from the circle, a man whose presence commanded attention. His face, partially illuminated by the firelight, bore a grim resolve and an unsettling charisma, the leader of the sect. The man's voice rang out, clear and forceful. "Briarwood is tainted," he declared. "Only through fire can it be reborn. The old sins must be burned away, and a new dawn must rise from the ashes." Alden felt a surge of both fear and determination. Here was the source of Briarwood's torment, the man who wielded fire as a weapon of fanaticism. But as the ritual continued, the minister and the schoolteacher realized the sect's reach extended deeper than they had imagined. The symbols and chants hinted at ancient, perhaps forgotten traditions, blending old pagan rites with twisted interpretations of faith. It was a dangerous syncretism that threatened to unravel the very fabric of Briarwood's belief. Watching from the shadows, Alden resolved that confronting this sect would require more than courage. It would demand wisdom, patience, and the unwavering strength of his community. As the gathering dispersed, fading into the night like ghosts, Alden and Abigail retreated to the safety of the woods, their minds heavy with the knowledge they had gained. The sect's presence was undeniable, their purpose clear, but the path to stopping them was fraught with peril. Back in Briarwood, the minister shared what he could with trusted allies, urging caution and unity. He knew that exposing the sect risked inflaming tensions further, but silence would only allow the fires and the fear to grow. The secret meetings, the ritualistic symbols, and the fanatical leader's words painted a grim picture. Briarwood stood on the precipice of spiritual and social upheaval, caught between the sect's destructive zeal and the townsfolk's fracturing trust. Reverend Alden understood that the coming days would test not only his resolve, but the very soul of Briarwood. The fires were not merely physical flames, but manifestations of a deeper conflict, a battle for the town's heart and future. Yet amid the shadows, Alden clung to hope. Through faith, reason, and the strength of community, he believed Briarwood could endure. But to do so, the sect's fire had to be confronted and extinguished before it consumed all that the town held dear. The night air was thick with tension when Reverend Alden confronted Elias Crow, the enigmatic leader of the secret sect that had cast a long shadow over Briarwood. Their meeting took place beneath the towering oaks of the secluded grove, a place steeped in the eerie glow of fading embers and whispered incantations. Alden approached with measured steps, the weight of his conviction steadying his nerves despite the palpable danger. Elias awaited him amid the remnants of a smoldering fire pit, his dark cloak blending into the shadows, eyes gleaming with a fervor that bordered on fanaticism. His presence was commanding, a man who believed himself chosen to enact a divine cleansing upon the town through fire and ritual. The air between them crackled not only with the dying flames, but with the collision of two opposing wills. "Your faith blinds you, Reverend," Elias intoned, voice low and resolute. "Briarwood rots beneath false piety, and only through fire can it be purified. The church you mourn was a symbol of that corruption. We are the flame that will burn away the rot." Alden met his gaze unflinchingly. "You mistake destruction for salvation. Faith is not a weapon to wield against our neighbors or our past. True cleansing comes through repentance and reconciliation, not through ashes and fear." The tension between them escalated quickly, words sharp as the cold night air. Elias's conviction was unyielding, his belief in the righteousness of his cause absolute. Alden, driven by a resolute hope to preserve his community, sought to reach the man beneath the zealotry. Their confrontation grew heated, voices rising amidst the whispering trees. As Elias gestured toward the forest, a stray ember caught a dry leaf, igniting a small flame that spread rapidly. In the struggle to contain the fire, a gust of wind fanned the flames, turning the grove into a blaze that roared with ferocity. Chaos erupted. The forest around them crackled and smoked as the fire spread with alarming speed. Alden and Elias grappled amidst the inferno, their conflict mirrored by the consuming flames. Members of the sect, startled by the conflagration, scattered into the darkness, leaving the grove a battlefield of fire and shadow. Amidst the chaos, Alden's focus remained steadfast. He sought not only to quell the fire, but to prevent further destruction of a town already scarred by loss. His prayers rose above the crackling blaze, a plea for mercy and protection. The struggle ended as abruptly as it had begun, the fire consuming much of the grove before it could be contained by the efforts of Alden, Jonas Crane, and other townsfolk, who arrived with buckets and blankets. The sect's influence, fractured by the night's events, began to wane as members fled or were apprehended. In the aftermath, the grove lay charred and silent, a stark reminder of the night's violence. Briarwood mourned the loss of forest and sanctuary, yet found a glimmer of hope in the sect's dissolution. The community, battered but unbroken, began the slow process of healing. Reverend Alden, weary yet resolute, addressed the town in the newly rebuilt town hall. His voice carried the weight of sorrow and determination. We have faced the flames of fear and fanaticism, and though the scars remain, so too does our spirit. Let this night be a lesson that unity and compassion are the true fires that cleanse and renew. The sect's dissolution did not mark an immediate end to Briarwood's trials. The scars of suspicion and division lingered, and the rebuilding of trust required patience and forgiveness. Yet the violent struggle in the grove had broken the sect's hold, offering a path toward reconciliation. As autumn gave way to winter, Briarwood's residents rallied together, determined to restore their town and their faith. The fires that once symbolized destruction now served as a warning and a catalyst for renewal. Reverend Alden's sermons echoed themes of forgiveness and hope, guiding the community toward a future shaped not by fear, but by shared strength. The night of confrontation became a pivotal chapter in Briarwood's history, a moment when darkness met light, and the town chose to rise from ashes, not as victims, but as survivors bound by resilience. In the cold light of early spring, Briarwood slowly began to stir with renewed purpose. The charred remains of the grove, where the sect's fiery confrontation had unfolded months before, lay quiet, beneath a tentative blanket of green shoots and budding leaves. The scars on the land mirrored the scars in the hearts of its people, still raw, but healing with each passing day. The town's spirit, battered by fear and division, was now focused on rebuilding, not only of structures but of trust and faith. The wooden church, once reduced to ashes, was at the center of this revival. Plans for its reconstruction had been drawn with care and reverence, aiming to restore not just a building, but the communal heart that had been so grievously wounded. Villagers gathered each morning as the sun rose, their hands calloused and faces set with determination. Carpenters measured and sawed, masons laid stones with steady hands, and women prepared meals to sustain the workers. Children, once fearful and quiet, played beneath the watchful eyes of elders, their laughter a tentative promise of hope. Reverend Alden found new strength in this collective effort. His sermons, delivered in the open air amid the skeleton frame of the church's rising walls, spoke not only of resilience, but of forgiveness and renewal. He reminded the townsfolk that the fires had tested their faith, but had not broken it, that from destruction could come rebirth. The rebuilding was not without its challenges. Resources were scarce, and the harshness of the lingering winter tested morale. Yet the community's resolve did not waver. Each nail driven and beam raised was a testament to their shared commitment to healing. Among the workers, old tensions began to dissolve. Neighbors who had once exchanged wary glances now shared tools and stories. Suspicion gave way to cooperation, and the once fractured community found common ground in their labor. Abigail Wells continued her role as schoolteacher, reopening the small schoolhouse that had survived the fires. Her classroom was a sanctuary where children learned not only reading and arithmetic, but also the values of empathy and understanding. She worked tirelessly to mend the invisible wounds left by months of fear and division. Jonas Crane, the blacksmith, became a pillar of stability, forging not only iron but bonds between neighbors. His steady presence reassured many, and his workshop became a gathering place where stories were shared and plans for the future made. Despite the progress, the memory of the sect and the fires lingered. Some townsfolk struggled to forgive those who had sown fear and destruction, while others feared the sect's remnants might still lurk in the shadows. Reverend Alden addressed these concerns openly, urging patience and the practice of grace. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light over the town, Alden stood before the nearly completed church. The wooden frame, sturdy and true, reached toward the sky, a symbol of Briarwood's enduring spirit. The congregation gathered, their faces illuminated by lanterns and hope. Alden's voice rose in prayer, calling for protection, unity, and the strength to move forward. The people joined in hymns, their voices weaving a tapestry of faith that seemed to push back the lingering darkness. The rebuilding of the church was more than a physical restoration. It was a reclamation of Briarwood's identity and soul. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer chains to bind the town. They were reminders of resilience and the power of community. In the weeks that followed, Briarwood began to return to a semblance of normalcy. Markets reopened with renewed vigor, festivals celebrated the coming of spring, and the rhythms of daily life settled into a comforting cadence. Reverend Alden continued his work, guiding his flock with humility and wisdom. He understood that healing was a journey, not a destination, and that the wounds left by fear and fanaticism would require time and care to fully mend. The story of the burning church and the sect that sought to destroy Briarwood became a somber legend, passed down through generations as both a caution and a testament to the town's endurance. As the sun rose each morning over the rebuilt steeple, it cast long shadows, reminders of trials overcome and the light that faith and unity could bring. Briarwood, once scorched and divided, now stood as a community renewed, its heart beating strong beneath the wooden beams of a church rebuilt not only of timber, but of hope. Decades had passed since the fires consumed Briarwood's ancient wooden church and fractured its once unified community. The town, nestled among New England's rolling hills and dense forests, had rebuilt itself, its church standing proudly once more, its steeple piercing the sky as a symbol of resilience. Yet the story of those harrowing months remained etched into the collective memory of Briarwood, whispered in hushed tones by elders and chronicled in the worn pages of local histories. Scholars and clergy alike debated the true cause of the fires. Were they the work of a secret sect wielding fire as divine judgment, or the manifestation of deep-rooted fears and superstitions spiraling out of control? Some argued the fires were a punishment for hidden sins, while others dismissed them as the tragic consequences of human fanaticism and misunderstanding. The tale had become a somber legend, a cautionary reminder of the destructive power of fear and division. It spoke of how suspicion could fracture a community, turning neighbor against neighbor, and how fanaticism, masked as righteousness, could consume the innocent alongside the guilty. Yet Briarwood's story was also one of resilience and rebirth. The community had rallied to rebuild not only their physical church, but the bonds that held them together. Through patience, forgiveness, and renewed faith, they had found a way to heal. The legacy of those events lingered in Briarwood's culture, a reminder to guard against fear's corrosive influence and to seek understanding in times of crisis. The church's walls bore plaques commemorating the trials faced and overcome, and the annual autumn service included prayers for unity and peace. Generations later, the fire's origins remained a subject of mystery and debate. Local historians uncovered fragments of old manuscripts and testimonies hinting at the secret sect's rituals and beliefs, but definitive answers eluded them. The scorch marks, the enigmatic sigils etched into wood and stone, were studied by linguists and occult scholars who proposed varying interpretations ranging from ancient pagan symbols to coded warnings. The town's elders cautioned against dwelling too deeply in the shadows of the past, encouraging instead a focus on the community's enduring strength. Briarwood had faced darkness and emerged, its spirit unbroken. In the broader context, the Briarwood fires echoed similar accounts across the region, where communities grappled with unexplained calamities and the complex interplay of faith, fear, and human frailty. The story served as a microcosm of the challenges inherent in tight-knit societies confronted with crisis. Today, Briarwood stands as a testament to the human capacity for healing and renewal. Its streets bustle with life, its church bell rings faithfully on Sundays, and its people carry forward the lessons learned from a time when fire threatened to consume their world. The narrative of the burning church remains a studied enigma, a chapter in history that invites reflection on the delicate balance between faith and fear, unity and division. It is a story that cautions against the perils of unchecked suspicion and fanaticism, while celebrating the enduring power of community and compassion. As the sun sets over Briarwood, casting long shadows across the reconstructed steeple and the vibrant town below, the echoes of that turbulent past linger, not as a spectre of despair, but as a beacon guiding future generations toward understanding, forgiveness, and hope reborn.